How can even you become corrupt? The answer can be found in the triangle, the fraud triangle. Let's take a look at the first point. Experts say corruption often begins with a sense of lack. You have financial problems, a need for more money or power, a feeling that you're missing out, not keeping up with others. Or maybe you resent your employer and want some kind of revenge. Now the second. For fraud to happen, you must have an opportunity to fill this void by secretly doing something wrong. What place do you regularly have access to other people's stuff? You guessed it, your job. Now the third point of the triangle, rationalization, the most interesting one, because it gets into what's happening in your head. You might cut a few corners at first and not get caught. Nothing happens, so you steal more. But inside, part of you knows you've done something wrong. Why hide it? But you begin to justify your actions. I'm just going through a rough patch. Everyone is doing it. It's not hurting anyone. Pretty soon you're living a lie. You might not even think you're a crook, but you are now. For more information, visit postingcourier.com/uncovered.
I'm Autumn Phillips. I'm the editor of the Post and Courier. We have had a really interesting year. We started Uncovered, our series about corruption and abuse of power, about a year ago. We learned a lot about the kind of records to pull, the kind of threads to follow to show who is putting money in their pocket. So we're going to talk about that today. We got a lot of questions sent in early, and enough questions that we thought this might make a good discussion, with the audience. So we're going to talk for a while, and then stop talking and start taking questions. So we'd love to hear from you. Be ready. And I heard that there are journalism students in the audience. Is that true? Raise your hand if you're a journalism student. Whoa. Yeah, that's awesome. Oh, that's really cool. So after this event, we're going to hang out. Please come and introduce yourself. I'd love to meet you. Introduce yourself to our reporters. So I'll introduce you to everybody. Avery Wilkes. This is our projects team, and Barbara at the end. Avery reports out of our Columbia office. If you don't know this, we have 13 journalists working in Columbia, which I think is really cool. We have newsrooms all over the state: Greenville, Spartanburg, Myrtle Beach, Georgetown, North Augusta, and in June we're going to open one in Hilton Head. Glenn Smith is going to moderate today. He's our watchdog editor that leads all our projects. Stephen Hobbs, Tony Bartlemay, and Barbara Ball. So I was here in Columbia on Friday, and I got to witness Barbara winning the Assertive Journalist of the Year award, and learned today that it is her third time winning it. So Anyway, enjoy. Please ask questions, and please introduce yourself afterward.
There we go. It's good. All right, great to see so many people turn out today. Really excited to have you. We're also really excited to be entering our second year of Uncovered. As Autumn said, the first year was really exciting. It was something we'd never tried before, and yielded somewhere around 40 stories, which was much more than we had anticipated, and we have roughly an equal number of tips waiting for us to dig into this year, though we're all always interested in hearing more. Tony, I was hoping we could start things off with you telling us a little bit how Uncovered got started, and so what led us to take this on.
All right, thanks, Glenn. Nice to see everybody here. So, investigative stories are kind of like links in a chain, and you could say the first link began one night while I was sitting at my computer when I got an email from a source who said, "Hey, have you seen these documents?" And he explained that there was this nonprofit called Paper that had used the Freedom of Information Act to get a bunch of spending records for Kershaw and Richland County's solicitor, a guy named Dan Johnson. And then they created this website and put those documents out for everybody to look at. But nobody had. And my source said, hey, you ought to take a look at what they put out because there are a lot of interesting expenses, I hear. So there were about 1,000 pages. I don't know. It was just this big mass of receipts and credit card statements. It was kind of mind-boggling in its just density. So we began looking through it, and lo and behold, there was this expense for a trip to Ecuador. And there was another one for some orthodontal work in Kentucky. And then, I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota originally, so I saw this expense for some Minnesota Twins tickets. And then my favorite one was an Uber receipt, an Uber Black receipt for $179 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And the cool thing about that receipt is that it has the route. So I traced the route, and lo and behold, you could tell for sure that he went to Prince's house to take a look. So we began looking, and there were just lots of expenses. And long story short, we did a story that led to some criminal charges. The guy went to federal prison. So we started thinking, what else can we look at? Who else is spending like this? And we remembered that Dan Johnson had gone to, he had gotten his start as a sheriff's investigator. And we knew that sheriffs had gotten in trouble, so we began to think, well, let's blanket the state with Freedom of Information Act requests, FOIA requests, for the same kind of spending that Dan Johnson had done. And lo and behold, we got another bunch of questionable expenses. There was a guy named Alex Underwood, the Chester County sheriff, who among other things, had these $100 a night room upgrades. And I remember I asked him why he was spending $100 a night extra on his rooms at various conferences. And he said, well, I'm a big guy, and I don't want my feet to dangle off the mattress. Long story short, he's facing criminal charges right now, or actually sentencing. So from there, we got some other information about some gas authorities, and we began to think more deeply, what's going on in these rural counties, because that's where a lot of the problems were. And so then we came up with this idea of Uncovered, which it takes a look at corruption, with a focus on places and institutions that have avoided the spotlight. And then we teamed up with a bunch of local newspapers, and since then we've just been it's been a wonderful collaboration with all these local newspapers in our partnership.
Big parts of Uncovered was taking a look at the importance of local newspapers in these areas that have faced all sorts of challenges. Avery, I was hoping you could explain the concept of news deserts and tell us a little bit about the loss of newspapers in South Carolina and what that's meant.
Yeah, so I'm from Chester, South Carolina, which is a really booming metropolis between Charlotte and Columbia, population 5,000. So I actually grew up really respecting and looking up to the journalists at the Chester News and Reporter, which publishes, twice a week. And, the reporters there, I think there's 2.5 of them. One of them's part-time. They just work really, really hard to get the paper out every Monday or every Wednesday and every Friday. I think now they're only every Friday. And so I, based on my experience with them, I've grown to respect all of these local papers all over the state, many of which are just like the Chester News and Reporter. They're doing their best. Some of them are journalists who used to work with the AP or with much larger news outlets and went home to work for their hometown papers. Some of them deliver the paper as well as taking photos and writing the stories and laying out the pages and doing everything else that at papers like ours, might be the job of just, one or 9 people, but there it's just one person. And still more papers are closing entirely. So you've got this really big problem where, we've had 10 papers close all over South Carolina in 2020 alone. And then the ones that are still open are struggling. They don't have the time to file FOIA requests. They don't have the money to pay for those FOIA requests. They don't have the time to dig through hundreds of pages of spending records when they get those documents back. And so what they bring to the table is that they know their communities really well. They hear all the local gossip, which can fly quickly in small towns. But what we could provide is that we could come in and do a lot of that really time-intensive, expensive investigative reporting, and then rely on them to sort of know what's going on in the ground and point us in the right direction. And it's made for a very symbiotic partnership, I think.
Thanks. Barbara, you run a small paper in the Midlands that's been honored for great watchdog journalism. As Autumn said, 3rd Assertive Journalist of the Year award. Congratulations. Tell us a little bit about the challenges you face in doing your jobs and how officials have made that harder using FOIA as a weapon against you, and also advertising dollars. You were telling me a little bit about that beforehand. Talk a little bit about those challenges.
Well, Avery just got through telling you what a lot of our challenges are. I think one thing we face in doing investigative writing is different from what a large newspaper faces, because maybe the Post and Courier covers the whole state. You don't know these people. We know these people that we are writing about doing bad things, and that makes it really tough. And then when we write about it, like right now, my town government, because of our reporting, they don't give us their advertising anymore, and that's a big source of our advertising. In our situation, we're not owned by a bigger company, so the buck does stop with us, literally. Sometimes we just wonder where we're going to get the money to put out the next paper, and we still want to have quality news, good reporting, so we rely on freelancers, and we have 2 really good freelancers. They're both experienced journalists. One was the editor of the Aiken Standard, and he now has another job, and he writes for us part-time. And the other one lives in Pennsylvania. She works for USA Today and other newspapers, and she is a really big help to us, because it really takes somebody who's really good at, you really want sharp writing, and investigating writing is just not easy. You have to know where to go look for things, and they do. I think our challenge is so that we literally do everything. I mean, we do like I do the advertising, I do probably 3/4 of at least half of the writing. I have an editor and 2 freelancers, and then a couple of lesser freelancers that write local stories. It is a challenge just getting the paper out every week, and that's about it.
Yeah, I know working on this project has really taught us to appreciate the work done at the community papers in like a whole new light. Just seeing paper up in Union where at the end of the day, when they get done with the paper, the publisher and the editors get in the car and then deliver it to people's homes afterwards. Or in Chester, like you're saying, Travis and his crew there, reporting on high school basketball games at night, to council meetings, to the latest big fish pulled out of the falls, and then also finding time to go through 5,000-6,000 pages of emails to find out little nuggets in there about how government is not doing its job. So really impressive stuff. So Stephen, Uncovered's designed to help bring these stories to light. Please explain how the Uncovered model works and some of the challenges the team faced early on.
Yeah, so one of the kind of exciting things about this was the collaboration and the opportunity that we were able to collaborate with, I think, 17 different papers across the state. Now, we are running a daily newspaper. Other papers are running on a weekly, or like Avery said, bi-weekly model. So there are some times where, we have a story that's ready to publish, but the place that we're trying to share it with maybe isn't going to publish for a few days. And so there were sometimes some challenges related to that. Or we have this very long story, and maybe that would fill up a large part of the publication that we're sharing it with. So there were those different challenges. But I think what was great about it was we were willing to share our stories for free, and say, please, use this story if you're interested in it. And I think one of the exciting things that was kind of interesting there was people that I talked to on different stories that they had seen our coverage in another paper that we were a partner with, and they had been able to see that. So I think it was a great way to get stories across the state to people that wouldn't have seen it. I think another thing that was great about it was just, so we have the collaboration with the different outlets, but then also collaboration with people like Barbara and other people about stories and ideas. So that sometimes means we might report on a story together, or there were times when an editor at another paper would share something with me and a colleague and say, I don't have the time to pursue this, but we're willing to publish the story. Can you kind of pursue it, maybe file some records requests or help us with the records request, or maybe pay for a records request? But then we can kind of do something together, but you all are able to take the lead on it because I'm just too busy with other duties. And so there was a real collaboration there that I think allowed us to get some stories out that maybe never would have gotten out or just would have taken a lot more time without it. So those are some of the ways that kind of the model worked to make it work, yeah.
Barbara, maybe you could tell them a little bit about the story we worked on with you. That was a story you've been trying to tell for some time, and tell us a little bit, like, why was it so important to tell that story, and how hard had they made it to keep it out of print?
We had been following the Fairfield School District. Their pupil funding is the highest in the state, and I think it was like $20,000 a student maybe, and they had a lot of trips, a lot of expenses that, that's their choice, but it was a lot of money being spent. They flew all over Europe, and I think it was good for them. A lot of those students did not have exposure to things that maybe students in better school districts, where people have better incomes. But we were curious about the superintendent's salary after one of the board members asked him one night how much he made, and he said he didn't know. So we started looking into that, and we FOI'd, and we were told that it would, after long delay, we were told it would be, I think, $235 to get those documents. And we just didn't have $235 to spend on that. So we kind of put it aside, and about that time, Joey Craney, who was an investigator with Post and Courier, had called me to talk about collaborating on some stories. We were talking about subjects, and I mentioned that we were having trouble getting our FOI response, and he said, well, we'll pay for it. So they contacted the school, and guess what? They didn't ask them for any money. And I think they made a few phone calls to you all, in fact, maybe pushing back.
Yeah, definitely a few.
And you might want to tell them about that. Do you? Okay. So Joey worked with me, and we got the information, and the story turned out on the front page of the Charleston Post and Courier. But they were a big help. I couldn't have done it without them, mainly because a lot of the stories take a lot of time, and you have to be timely with some stories. You've got to get them out or just forget it. So they did step in and help us with that. And then I think we worked on the ethics story a little bit. That was a time I was really too busy, and they did all the work.
And we look forward to doing some this year, too. We got to talk about that. So we thought we'd pause now that you know a little bit about what we're doing, and find out if anyone had any initial questions or any observations they'd like to make.
So I'm a journalism student. I'm in Professor Burns's class. He's here, but
Extra credit for you, huh?
that's the goal. But so you'd mentioned earlier that a lot of these smaller local papers that only cover a town or a county are struggling financially, and several have gone under as a result of the pandemic. Is there any way that the Post and Courier, as a much larger paper, is helping to spread out that financial burden? Because y'all have talked about how you've collaborated with those papers on these uncovered stories and talked about how you've paid the FOIA requests and things, but news functions best if it's independent. So is there any way that the Post and Courier, as a larger paper, has been giving back financially to the smaller ones?
What's that? Not at present. I mean, we have been assisting, like, again, with FOIA costs and lending resources and journalists and people to help with stories at this point. Also, do you want to talk a little bit about this effort could we talk about?
Yeah, well, I'll explain a new project we're doing called the Oasis Project. And we haven't announced it publicly, but what the hell, let's do it now. So the Oasis Project it will be a collaboration with the Presbyterian College, which this summer is going to do a sort of an in-depth analysis survey across the state of local newspapers' needs. And with the idea of creating some sort of database and understanding of the needs, and then identifying some ways forward, such as, perhaps finding some way to improve the viability of a paper that's about to be passed to another person. It's the succession of a paper from the maybe older owners to younger owners. So we're very excited about that project. That's sort of the foundation of what we hope is a larger, more solution-oriented effort.
And I thought it was a good question. I just wanted to add that historically, newspapers have always tried to kill each other. Like, there's always been newspaper wars. And at the beginning of this project, like we're talking now, and it's this big kumbaya thing, and everybody's, it's a symbiotic relationship, but like there were some tensions early on, and we were pretty nervous about working with other papers just because it really had never been done before. Historically, like I said, papers all over the state have always competed with each other. If we were going to be writing a story in Fairfield 3 years ago, we might have viewed Barbara as competition. And we might have tried to, push really hard to get our story out first. So this is actually like a pretty dramatic shift in how we're thinking about doing news together. And what's great about it is now, even if it's not an uncovered story, I get calls from editors all over the state saying, hey, I've got one source telling me this. Can you call some of your sources in Columbia, and maybe we can just work on this quick story together? So we're actually developing like really great relationships, even outside of Uncovered, that I think is really benefiting like South Carolina readers as a whole in general, even outside of Uncovered. But that's a great question.
I have two questions. How much did the superintendent make? What was his salary?
He made $192,000 a year, which was the highest in the state for that size school.
Yeah.
And when we tallied in his benefits, he made $225,000.
That's a lot.
Yes,
My-
it is. And those and what we were looking at is, why were the scores so low? What more could be done to help the students bring up their scores? And that is a high poverty area. So you can understand a lot of why their scores are low. Maybe not the opportunity that other areas would have. Still, that's a lot of money. $20,000. I think this year it seems like it was $21,000 that per pupil that they get, and compared to what Richland 2 gets, 15, 16, something like that. So that's why we were looking into it.
Thank you. And the other is a process question. You have so much information that you're gathering and you're exchanging that information. How do you keep up with it, and how do you keep it straight? Do you have a system?
We try to be organized, but as journalists, sometimes we fall short of that. We do have a number of things to keep us organized. We have a tip tracker that we use, where we've collected, like 100 tips since we started Uncovered. And so we literally track what the tip was, the substance of it, when it came in, who's responding to it, have you filed a FOIA to try to figure it out, and assigning it to a reporter, et cetera. We track FOIAs that we sent. So we've got all these spreadsheets that we all can collaborate on, and it helps us as much as we can keep track of like what stories are coming up, who's working on what, which papers we're partnering with. Sometimes we're working on stories with a paper where we have to create like a Google Drive and share with them our notes ahead of time so that they can see what we know and we can see what they know. And it helps them as they're interviewing people, and it helps us to know what they know when they're interviewing people. Kind of letting those borders down on like what we're working on is a really scary thing to do as a reporter, but it helps with the collaboration. And really, like every reporter goes through their stories differently, but I like to create these big master Google Docs that are, I'll have like themes, or I'll separate them by sources that I spoke with. And for some of these stories, for an average daily story, that my Microsoft Word document or Google Doc might be, 3 or 4 pages long. But for an uncovered story, they're typically like 80 or 90 pages long. And some of the reporters I work with get mad at me about that because it's a lot to go through, but I just like to be as thorough as possible. But it is a lot to keep track of, and it kind of shows how difficult and how intensive investigative reporting can be. So we kind of have these little systems to try to help us out as much as we can.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's, you watch a movie on an investigative reporter, and it's this very glamorous thing. You're meeting a source in a parking garage, and they're giving you this sack of information, and oftentimes it's more like 5 o'clock, and here comes this gigantic document dump of like 10,000 emails that you got to sort through, and a lot of it is really tedious, time-consuming work that you really have to dig in and just go down. But that's where you find the stuff, though. It's by doing that hard work and by really just digging and digging and digging and making sure you have lots and lots of spreadsheets to track all the stuff that other people can see and monitor, so you don't get lost in that.
Yeah, I'll just add that Avery's right. Every reporter has their own system, but some of the sort of practical things that I do, since there are a lot of students here, when I begin a story, I will create a spreadsheet of sources. So I always have the numbers, emails, everything right there in front of me. I'll also, as I'm learning about stuff, I'll create a chronology of important points. And that chronology is really helpful when you're starting to write, because suddenly you have this beautiful chronological record of your reporting, and then you often just write your story based on that chronology. So those are just a couple of things I do.
So this is a tag team question. My wife is an ex-reporter and I'm an ex-cop. So what I wanted to do is a comment on the neat, cool triangle exhibit on the first of the video. And the comment is that it focused on stealing. And I have a theory that people have a lack of understanding about what corruption is. And the way our laws are structured lends itself to this misunderstanding, I believe. So we tend to think, I believe, about separate crimes. There could be a string of crimes, but people don't tend to think about what they may have in common. And my theory is that taking advantage is the real crux of corruption. An official who takes advantage, it may not involve money, it may not involve stealing. Anyway, that's my theory, and I just wondered if you would comment on it. Then I'll turn it over to my wife.
I can talk. The fraud triangle's really interesting because one of the prongs is this whether it's either called pressure or a sense of lack, this need, and that can be both monetary and psychological. You feel like you're not keeping up with people, or you're just not, something's not right in your life. So you make up for it by cutting a corner, and then pretty soon you're doing something wrong. And that other prong is opportunity, which you have to have that opportunity, ability to do something, and that happens, either at your office or in the street. And then my favorite corner is the rationalization of what you're doing, and part of you understands that you're doing something wrong, but then you make an excuse for it. It's okay, and that's fascinating to me because I've stared people in the face as they told me that they were doing nothing wrong when they were clearly doing something wrong and later got convicted of doing something wrong. So I don't know, that fraud triangle is a nice handy way of understanding all the psychological factors that go into it.
So that's great. I think it was a great little exhibit or presentation. I'm just asking, how can we get people to think about corruption in a broader sense than just fraud or just stealing? The triangle concept is great.
Well, I think clarifying what is right and wrong is a helpful way, because if you know the rules and you don't follow them, then that becomes clear. And that's a problem we've kind of identified in the state, that that there's a sort of lack of ethics training. And if we increase that ethics training, it becomes harder to rationalize that you're doing something wrong. Back to that triangle.
Yeah, like you're saying too, it's not all somebody stuffing money in their pocket or something like that. It's getting that job for your cousin, or bending the rules that give people an advantage over other people, that when you confront them, or they don't always see it, that what's the problem with that? That's the way we've always done things around here. But it's bringing that to the light that that's a conflict of interest, right?
Okay, I assume there are journalism faculty here. This is my question to the panel. Having been, stand up and raise your hand, because you're responsible for this. What I'm going to ask is, I work for the Greenville papers, I work for the state newspaper, I work for Governor Dick Riley, I covered the state Senate. I've been around state government for a really long time. Here's my question. What I find amazing is that the average person, and I guess the average young person, particularly in this audience, doesn't know how government works. So you don't know who to ask or how to go about it. I mean, even the Board of Trustees, when Barbara was talking, you were saying they were going around. Well, I know those are the trustees, the elected officials, not necessarily the people in this auditorium. So my question is to the journalism faculty, how are you going to prepare young people to know how the system works? That is the hardest thing to do, and it takes a really long time to learn it. And oh dear.
That's the journalism faculty saying, I don't want to answer that.
I'll try to help, but if you guys want to step in and defend yourself, let me know. I graduated from here, the J School, 6 years ago. And when I started J School, I did not know much of what you're saying. I was very ignorant of that. I wanted to be a sports reporter, and I had no idea how government worked. And when my professor, Doug Fisher, asked everybody who their state representative was, I didn't know the answer, and he was my second cousin. So, and that's what happens when you grow up in Chester. But at least in my experience, that was something that Doug Fisher, who's recently retired, really drilled into us, was how does government work? How does city council interact with county council? Which laws supersede each other? We spent hours on special purpose districts, and I was just thinking, I am never ever going to use this. And I don't know how much time I've spent on Uncovered looking into special purpose districts. And the reason I understood so much of it was because of what I learned in J School. So if you guys want to defend yourself some more, go for it. But I do think that's important. I think it's crucial that journalists leave J School understanding like how government works, because they're going to be reporting on it very soon, even if they come into J School planning to do anything else. And at least in my experience, they did a decent job with it. So.
No, that's right. I mean, you got to know where things are so you can find them, right?
I'm just an observer. I came up from Somerville, and I came down here and retired 5 years ago and came down here. I was a lawyer, and I was a prosecutor for probably a third or the half of my career. But the one thing I remember, or I tried to remember every time I had something that dealt with government theft, was that he's putting his, or she, is putting her hand or his hand in my pocket, because government never earns a penny. They start on the basis of our trust, and we give taxes. That's our money. And when they take our money, that's a crime against all of us. Every time they put their hand in a pocket, like the lady who's now got $30,000 extra in her clerk of the court. I've known a lot of clerks of the court, but they wouldn't do that. I've known a lot of police officers. I've known police officers who went on construction jobs and stole things, put them in their trunk. That's stealing from somebody else. If they take something out of the county office building, that's stealing from you and me. So that's what you really have to remember. And I think part of it is there's no civics taught in schools anymore. It doesn't appear to be. There's no history taught in schools anymore to a point where you need to think about it and not just learn dates and times and everything like that. You have to go into it and really study. Each state has a different form of government. Does anybody know one state that doesn't have a two-party system? But that's you do need to learn all that stuff to really do it. But each state's different, so you got to know where the nooks and crannies are, to look in those nooks and crannies. But always remember, you know, when they steal government money, it's your money. Thank you.
Very true.
Okay. So one thing that I was really interested in is, like in my classes, I've been learning to avoid conflicts of interest. So what I was wondering is, like, when you're in a small town and you have to do a story on someone you know, like, what's the repercussions for that? Is there backlash, or how does that work?
That's a Barbara question.
Oh yeah, there's backlash on our Facebook, and but we cover about 7 government meetings a month, 7 or 8, and it's not backlash from the meetings. I mean, we just report, and that's what we have to be careful to do. Just report. We have an editorial page if we want to tell our opinion, but we try to be very careful to just report. And I don't think we get a lot of backlash just reporting. Now, things go on in the town, like right now our government's being sued in Blythewood, and you know, there's pressure to take sides, and there is backlash from that. As I said, they aren't giving us ads anymore now. They're giving them to somebody else. And so we just kind of suffer through that. But as really, though, when most of our stories, we have support more from the public more than backlash. They want to know, and they're thankful to us for reporting it, because they don't all go to the meetings. They wouldn't really know about it if we didn't report on it.
Okay, yes, it's working. All right. So having read the uncovered stories, they really focus mostly on local districts, either counties or the special purpose districts. But the issues that they point out tend to be either state or federal, like lack of federal enforcement's a common theme, lack of state enforcement, toothlessness of the State Ethics Commission. Well, wouldn't that, so I was wondering, wouldn't that also affect potentially the state government, the state bureaucracy? Or am I missing something?
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. But yeah, a number of our stories have involved state government. I believe Glenn wrote about conflicts of interest with DNR. Was it DNR with the oyster, the shell game story? Tony wrote recently about a conflict of interest within, was that also DNR? Yeah, so, but yeah, so we focus mainly on local governments and trying to go into those news deserts that we mentioned before and provide the kind of investigative reporting that isn't typically there. But and I'm glad you caught on to that, but these are stories that affect more than just people in Clinton and Edgefield and Fairfield. Typically the stories that we write, we find a lesson in there that affects the whole state and that it shows that there's a problem that needs to be solved. And a lot of them do need to be solved by state lawmakers. They've taken some steps to address that in this legislative session, but as with most things, the legislature is a creature of inertia. If not pushed to do anything, it will do nothing. And so some of these proposals, whether it's getting more money for investigators at the Ethics Commission, getting more money for investigators at the Inspector General's office, barring people who owe massive ethics fines from running repeatedly for re-election as they have for years and years. There have been a number of bills that have been filed in direct response to uncovered stories, but as we've seen, a few of them have stalled out because they don't have effective champions, or the people in charge of giving them a hearing don't care as much. And so it's really on us to, as a newspaper, to stay on them and hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they follow through on their promises. But it's also on everyday people to call their legislators and let them know that this is important. It's important that state government and local government function properly. And one of the things when I talk to lawmakers about ethics is that one of the excuses I hear is that people don't call them about it. People call them and say, my taxes are too high, or the stop sign at the end of my road got knocked down. Can you get somebody from the DOT to come pick it back up? But we really need more groundswell support, more, I'm looking for the word, I can't find it, but we need more people to push their legislators for that kind of change, or it's simply not going to happen.
I was just going to add, I think there's a lot of value sometimes too looking at these smaller communities, because that apathy, that feeling, if you feel that you're in a small community and people aren't listening, or things are just going on the way that they have been for so long, I feel like that bubbles up. And so when there's not that newspaper, there's not that person covering it, when there's not that, there's that sense of just, I can say something and no one's going to listen. I think that adds up. And so I think that there's a lot of value in looking sometimes in the small communities that aren't being regularly covered, and we file a FOIA request and the agency doesn't know how to handle it because they haven't had one in a long time. I think there's value in just making sure that people always know that we're kind of watching. And even though we're in Charleston or across the state somewhere, that we're keeping people accountable, that people are asking questions, because I think it's sometimes in those communities where fewer questions are being asked, where there's more ripeness for something like this to happen.
Yeah, we in past years, we had done some stories. Capital Gains is one where we looked at how lawmakers were using their campaign accounts, like their personal ATM machines, just spending them on all sorts of things that had nothing to do with campaigns. We had done a lot of work on the State House corruption probe, looking at how influence was being peddled here in Columbia. And as we started on Uncovered, and as Tony said, as we were looking at the sheriff's story and the prosecutor's story, we noticed that there was all these crimes occurring in these small areas that weren't getting the same attention. And we looked at SLED arrests and indictments over the past decade. I think 75% of the cases, it was over 100 cases that we saw, over 75% were in these small towns. And it wasn't for huge amounts of money. It wasn't somebody walking away with $10 million. It was somebody pocketing $2,000 in scrap metal proceeds that they were supposed to give to the county but didn't. It was somebody who was supposed to put some money in the child support enforcement fund or some child support payments, and instead they stuffed it in their own pocket. And it was those small things, and it's sort of that corrosive effect that occurs around the state. And if you look at a story that's going on in Dillon, you might say, what relevance does that have for up in Greer or something? But you see the systemic failures that allow these things to happen and how they allow them to happen statewide.
I wanted to answer Sally Hughley's question. I'm on the faculty, and I teach in the senior semester program, which is a Monday through Friday newsroom, and we do send our students to the legislature. And one of the things is very intimidating at first for students, and I would encourage students, sophomores, freshmen, whatever, to go and just meet your legislator, because they're not really that intimidating. When you get there and you go to the committee meetings, you see how it works, and then you become much more adept once you actually get out into the field. So it's just a scary place at first, but you have to remember we're paying their bills, so you know, they're responsible to us. So we're trying, we're doing our best. I think too many students think of politics as a fight ring, and they don't want to dig into the deeper issues. And you know, people who get ahead dig into those issues, like my former student Avery.
My question was, what's sort of the process of, after you get a tip, first deciding, or sorry, verifying that the tip is accurate, and then deciding whether or not the tip has a story like worth pursuing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different avenues, kind of based on where it is, but it can be like file a records request, and that could be a way to find out something, and maybe you file an initial records request. So there was a superintendent in Clarendon County that he was renting he was living in a townhouse, and then later the townhouse was purchased by the district that he worked for, and then he was able to stay in the townhouse for a few months without having to pay rent. And we had heard that maybe that there was a superintendent living in the townhouse, so we initially filed the records request for the rental agreement, and we saw his name on there. And then, okay, well, we say, well, let's see, you know, how long was he there, or how much did he pay? And then we find out he didn't, you know, pay anything. And then we say, you know, is there any records or anything that show his payment, or any meetings where this is discussed and being voted on? So sometimes it can be just kind of going through questions step by step, like what is something that I want to know. Now, sometimes you don't always find that answer in the records, so it's talking to people. Sometimes you talk to people who maybe worked at that agency, or maybe used to work at the agency, and say, hey, do you know about this issue or topic, or did you hear about this thing that happened? So sometimes it's just kind of trying to pull in information either through people or documents to try to get those things, because one of the things about the Freedom of Information Act is it does have a set deadline of when we're supposed to get records back, but oftentimes agencies will use, you know, the full amount of time that they have. So that can be upwards of a couple of months by the time you get the information back. So really going to people also is a way to kind of do both at the same time to verify. And then at some point, I think it gets to a level where we think, okay, this is a story or not. You know, the information that someone told you is not panning out, or it's the opposite, or there's a lot more complicated story there. And then we talk about, okay, is this still worth a story, or is it really not something that we want to pursue at the time? So I guess we try to just chip away at things step by step with that.
And I think with Uncovered, one of the things you don't see, because you don't hear about stories that don't go in, but we've spent a lot of time investigating things that didn't turn into anything. And that has its own value too, because communities have been wondering about some of these things for a long time, and had all these suspicions, and you're able to go back to the people and say, you know what, we got the records, we talked to the people, it's not what you think it is. So that has some value in itself.
I might add that there was a kind of very sensitive story that I did a month ago. It was about a former lieutenant with a sheriff's department who said the sheriff sexually assaulted her. So how do I verify that? That was one of those really tough ones, because the incident allegedly happened many years ago. What do I do with that? So I actually began to investigate her other aspects of her story to get a better understanding of whether or not she was credible. So that was one way of getting at that. So I went back and talked to people who could corroborate other pieces of her story till I reached a point where I believed that what she was saying was credible. So it really, and all that takes a lot of time and a lot of resources, and that's really the difference between investigative reporting and regular reporting. You need a certain set of skills, but you also need time to find out what's really happening. I like to look at the difference between regular reporting and investigative reporting. Is regular reporting is what people said happened. Investigative reporting is what really happened despite what people said.
And following up on what Glenn said, most investigative reporting is not meeting someone in the parking garage and them giving you the story. And when you're following these tips, like a lot of them don't go anywhere, and you're spinning your wheels, and your first thought is, when I get a tip, like, if this is true, is it a story? And if so, then you may pursue it further. I mean, I spent, Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong, but like a week looking into an allegation that someone who I thought was credible, because he had given me another story that did turn out, but this guy told me that a politician in South Carolina was like starving his horses. And so I was like, that's pretty serious. Like, so I called around to various vets and law enforcement officials in that area, and none of them knew what was going on. And one law enforcement official almost like raided the politician's farm, and I had to like pump the brakes on that because it was literally just one tip. And I filed FOIA requests and got all the incident reports related to that property, and looked it up on ArcGIS, and I did all this stuff to try to see if it's true, and it just totally wasn't, But I spent so much time disqualifying that and verifying that it wasn't true, and that's what a lot of investigative reporting is. Not every tip you get, and dare I say, the majority of the tips you get might not be true at all. They might lead to a completely separate story. I don't know how many times someone's given me a tip and said this really outrageous thing is happening, and in the process of me determining that it didn't happen, I found out something completely else happened that was worth the story. So it's not all super glamorous, but you end up learning a lot about how government works and how people operate, and some of that does turn into fruitful stories.
All right, we have room for 2 more questions.
It's interesting that you talk about apathy of smaller publications and conflict of interest in talking about smaller towns. Do you ever collaborate with a smaller publication and there's just like a reluctance to report on anything? And generally, what's the reaction when you reach out to a smaller publication?
I would say the lion's share of the papers that we've worked with have been very excited to tell these stories and have been very into collaborating on these things and bringing this to light. Have run into a couple instances, though, where I called up a newspaper in the PD region of the state and invited them to join us, and was told no and weren't interested, and then called back and said, hey, we got this story in your area. It involves a pretty big conflict of interest, and we've been working on it. And just got the cold shoulder on that, and then afterwards they came back and
they wrote, I guess, an editorial kind of pushing back against the reporting that we had done on the story. Yeah,
saying that it was a stand-up guy, nothing to see here. Post and Courier should be ashamed of itself for coming in, basically. So we've seen a couple instances like that. Either don't get the call back or not, and a couple instances. But I'd say overall, we're now up to 18 partner newspapers, and I don't see apathy from any of those folks. They want to tell good stories, and we're looking to add more and tell more uncovered stories.
And I think just to add on that too, like in Barbara's case, in the Sumter case, in other papers, there have been incidents where we're writing about important figures in a community, and they've been willing to publish stories when the blowback can be felt a lot more by them than us. So I think it really is. I mean, just even beyond that, they've, I think, shown a lot more initiative and encouraged, in publishing some of these stories because, they are the ones ultimately that are facing a lot of that. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just like the story Tony was just talking about in Sumter, they got to deal with the sheriff there every day for all sorts of important information, and they put that story on the front page of their paper. And though, you know, we got a little bit of blowback down in Charleston from that, nowhere near what you're going to get on the ground in Sumter. And they bravely proceeded in running that story.
Hello. We just moved to Columbia from the PD area. It's a follow-up on that answer that you gave. We lived there 50 years, working and living, and I read most of the newspapers in the PD area, and I was not impressed with any of them. That goes all the way from Myrtle Beach inland to especially Florence. Ooh. That's a dilly there. Anyway, I was just wondering, is there any paper in the PD area you collaborate with? Because the PD area has just gotten ignored politically, journalism, et cetera, from what I observed over that 40 to 50 years.
We're not currently working with anybody up there, but we're totally interested in, you know, would love to if somebody would like to collaborate with us, for sure. Yeah, actually, the Pageland paper and the Sumter paper, yeah. Sumter paper's a great paper. The Pageland guy's really into it too. I guess we are wrapping up. Thank you, everybody. I'd like to introduce Robbie Scott right now. She's going to have a couple final words for us.
Well, I'd like to start by thanking everyone for joining us tonight. We appreciate your coming out and spending this time with us. It's a very successful time, I believe. I am the Director of Development for the Post and Courier's Public Service and Investigative Reporting Fund. And tonight's panel discussion was presented in conjunction with Sunshine Week, which I'm sure all of you journalism students that are here tonight are familiar with, and if you are not, see any one of us after the meeting. The Sunshine Week is an initiative that is celebrated nationally to really drive home the importance of access to public information and open government. And it is celebrated March 13th through 19th of every year. Now, the Post and Courier realizes that the people of South Carolina have a legal right to know about information and open government in this state 365 days a year. And that's what the Post and Courier's Public Service and Investigative Journalism Fund is there for. Like many other freedoms, freedom of information and freedom of the press is not free. Deep dive reporting and collaborative journalism, like you've heard about here tonight, is expensive. And I'm going to go right back to Avery's comment. Just think about that when he was talking about going through 80 pages of documents, or 80 pages in a Word document to get that story, and that's just one story. It is expensive. And we were able to uncover these injustices in our state thanks to the support of our donors. And if we have any in our audience tonight, or anyone that's watching virtually, we would like to say thank you. Newspapers can no longer rely solely on advertising and circulation to exist. That's why we launched our philanthropy efforts. We want to continue to report on the issues that matter most to you. You've heard it before tonight, but I'm going to repeat it because it bears repeating. Government functions best when it operates in the open. We take our roles as watchdogs for the public very seriously, and we have a responsibility to the people of South Carolina to ask the hard questions and to expose corruption. We invite you, if you choose, to show your support and help us keep democracy alive in South Carolina at postandcourier.com/donate. Thank you.
Sunshine Week began in 2005. A group of editors got together and felt that there was an opportunity for us to once a year inform the public about open government, open meetings, open records, the things that journalists fight for every day.
It is important to have an open government, to have access, transparency, because you want to know how your government is making decisions and spending your money.
Sunshine Week is a time to remember the Freedom of Information Act, designed to protect citizens, to make sure they have access to the public's business, primarily documents and other records.
Those are your records. They're produced by your people, your elected officials. If there's something going on, those are documents that we want to share with you, and that's what makes that important.
If we didn't have FOIA, I would think we would just be in the dark, right? We would just have to take government officials' word for what they say they're doing.
The FOIA gives you access to police reports for the past 14 days. It allows you to look at employee personnel files. It allows you to look at meeting minutes. It grants you access to public meetings. It's an important transparency tool.
For us as journalists, it's a way for us to find stories and things to look into.
It's the main tool we have to ensure that public officials are held accountable to what we're paying them to do.
Corruption thrives behind closed doors, so without access to public information, there's typically a breakdown in the way that government is supposed to work.
Well, imagine what would happen if you leave people with no supervision and a lot of money.
They are using our tax dollars as their personal ATMs. That's not okay.
All of our stories are based on sourcing in one way or another. Frequently we speak to people or we attend meetings, but documents play a huge part in what we do, and in particular, documents that record what our governments are doing, what our public officials are doing.
They help round out a story. If there's a story that seems incomplete, FOIAs can be used to fill in that gap.
In order to access public documents, all you have to do is contact local city officials or county officials and ask for them, essentially. They are obligated under law to provide that to the public.
You could honestly get access to more than you think as an average citizen. It doesn't take any special certification to do it. It's your right as a South Carolinian to be able to access these documents.
It's really empowering, I think, for anyone in the public to be able to go to your government officials and ask for records.
The Freedom of Information Act, it's not just a tool for newspapers, it's a tool for everybody.
You know, most people don't realize how easy it is to file a FOIA request.
If you go to our website, postandcourier.com/uncovered, you will see on the right-hand rail something we call a Citizens Toolkit. Click on that and you will find some examples of how to write your own Freedom of Information Act request.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today on behalf of the Post and Courier. I want to also thank our panelists and Barbara for joining us today. Thank you to the journalism students and the teachers who came tonight. I believe, Glenn, Autumn, we said we're going to hang around a little bit to talk to our team. So with that, we are done. We will also make this recording available to share with others. Thank you.